Greetings and thank you for watching this Wit and Wisdom video. I have a book recommendation for you. And actually, it's not so much of a book recommendation as it is a book requirement. I don't know if I've ever felt so strongly about recommending a book as with this one. I feel so strongly about this that I am strongly considering buying this book in bulk and giving it away to any high school student heading off to college. Maybe sending it to some of my friends at the college where I used to teach. My wife does Bible studies with some women from church. I told my wife, listen, I will buy books for all of your group. I will clean the house and make dinner and invite them all over to the house. And I will even play the trumpet for them while they eat, if they would just read this book. It is that fantastic. Except I probably wouldn't play the trumpet because they haven't played it for years, and that would probably drive them away from the book. So, but I would like clean the entire house and make dinner, whatever they wanted, if they would just read this book. This is such an important book. So when I say this is a book recommendation, I'm really more like saying, you have to read this book. In fact, I texted this to one of my kids, and I said, you have to, in all caps, you have to read this book. No, really, you have to read this book. It is so good. I started reading it in the morning, and I didn't put it down. Well, I did stop for lunch, I guess, but I finished it that afternoon. It's not a very long book, and she's a really good writer, so it doesn't take that long. It is just fantastic. The book is called The Genesis of Gender by Abigail Favale. Abigail Favale. You can see it there. Abigail, F-A-V-A-L-E. F-A-V-A-L-E. The Genesis of Gender. A Christian Theory. It just came out, I think, just in maybe February or something like that. It's from Ignatius Press, which is a Catholic press. She is a Catholic. And she does quote popes at different places, but other than that, you'd never know that she was Catholic, really. Besides the fact that she tells you she is. So it is something that anybody, in fact, I think even if you're not a Christian, you should read this. In fact, almost if you're not a Christian, you really ought to read this. It will explain so much to you, I think. So let me just tell you what this does. Abigail Favale now she works for Notre Dame, actually. She used to be a professor and dean at a Christian college on the West Coast. Now she is associated with some department or organization or something, institute at Notre Dame. And so as of I think maybe just this past school year, maybe even the last few months, she's moved to Notre Dame. But she was a longtime professor in the English department on the West Coast. Her master's degree is in gender studies, and her PhD is in English, but she really got into gender stuff. So she taught it for many years, and I mean, she's writing from an insider, all right? She's writing from somebody who published, who was an expert in the field. And then, as she was teaching, more and more she began to think, I don't really know what good I'm doing, and I don't really know, is this stuff even true? And all I'm doing is sort of tearing things down. I'm not really building anything up, and she started to have doubts about what she was really doing. In fact, I want to read to you this really great section. It comes really early in the book, and it'll give you sort of a sense of how this book is written and what kind of a person she is. She had this kind of, she walked out of a class where she just felt like, I'm not really sure the students really got this, and I'm not really sure that I agree with this anymore. I left class that day feeling defeated and unsure why. I'd taught this text to undergraduates before many times with an untroubled conscience. In fact, I'd often felt good about exposing my students to heady and trendy theories about gender. When they voiced newfound uncertainty and confusion, as they usually did at the end of the course, I'd feel satisfied, as if my central task as a gender studies professor was to disrupt and unsettle their tidy and simplistic views, to expose them to irresolvable complexity. Now that work of disorientation, without any effort at reorientation, began to unsettle me. My conscience, after giving me reassuring high fives for the past decade, was now clearing her throat in the back room of my mind and asking, "So is any of this true?" In this state of unease, I sought the advice of an older professor I had respected. I rushed to his office straight from home, my hair still wet from a recent shower. I was newly back from maternity leave, always 5 minutes behind and sweating profusely, trying to cram all I could into the 3-hour windows between breastfeeding sessions. I showed up with a Diet Coke in hand, thinking I would be having a nice casual chat with my colleague. Within 5 minutes, I was in full-blown confession mode, disclosing the indictments of my conscience, not to a priest, but to a gray-bearded Quaker with a Gandalf vibe. "I feel like I've been giving my students poison to drink," I said. "For so many years I've been careless with their minds and, most disturbingly, their souls." The professor listened quietly to me, as was his way. He tends to speak few words, but those words are usually wise and rarely what you want to hear. He could have coddled me, told me I'd done what I thought was right at the time, that I was being too hard on myself. Instead, he said in an Appalachian drawl, "You know that verse in Matthew? The one that says if anyone causes the little ones to stumble, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the sea? I've always thought it would be a good idea for us professors to have that tattooed on our arms." That's what I was feeling, the millstone. In truth, it had been around my neck for years, but at least now I was feeling the weight of it. That much was a comfort. Abigail Favale was raised actually as a conservative evangelical Christian, but when she went off to college, she got involved in the gender studies department. And within a few years, she had wandered far from her faith. And she says that she would always call herself a Christian. She would always call herself a Christian. And yet, before long, she quit going to church at all. She quit praying, reading the Bible, really having anything to do with the practice of religion. And she began to realize that she was really more of an agnostic. And she plunged into this radical feminism, this secular feminism, and all the worldview that goes with it. Until finally she had this experience where she began to really doubt that she was doing any good. And this was really the start of her conversion experience, and she ended up finding herself not in evangelicalism, but in Catholicism. She actually wrote a book that I've heard about, I just never bought, about her conversion experience. And she doesn't really recount a whole lot of it, other than to say, I was in that world. I was in the conservative evangelical world that didn't really think much about what it was doing, and then I got totally sidetracked in college, and then I came back. And that's part of the story that she tells in this book. But along the way, what she really wants to get across is just the moral emptiness of the gender paradigm, as she calls it, which governs gender roles, gender relations, transgenderism, abortion, feminism in all of its forms. She was in it, and she came out of it. So part of this will explain to you in a really good way, just a really great way, explain to you what your kids will hear about gender when they go to college. She was in it. She knows what she's talking about. I got a lot of it when I was going through graduate school. I got a lot of gender theory and gender history and all that kind of stuff, like tons of it, so much so it got really, really repetitive. I remember reviewing a book on some gender history, and I'm like, oh man, not another one. And so what we had to do is read a book each week for each class. Typically what you do is you read a book each week and then write a review of it. And I was like, oh man, not another one. And so I read the introduction, I skimmed the introduction, I skimmed the conclusion, I read a few reviews of it, and then I wrote my review of it. And my teacher liked it, actually. My professor actually thought it was a decent review. I got a good grade on it. And I hadn't even read the book. That kind of tells you how repetitive it got to be, how expectable, how predictable this stuff could be. Anyway, so her description of the gender world, the gender academia world, just totally rings true to me. And yet she describes it in ways that just with a a sizzle, with a conciseness, with a gravity, and with a clarity that I couldn't approach. So she explains this whole thing really well. And not only will it explain to you what your kids are hearing, and probably actually in high school now too. Yeah, definitely in high school, certainly in college. But also helps to explain like this madness that is going on in the world. So she talks about her experience. She talks about her conversion a little bit. She talks about her conversation that I just read to you. She talks to you about kind of the gender theory, all that sort of stuff. But she also lays out a theory of gender, a Christian theory of gender that begins in Genesis. And it's really a beautiful vision of gender that really, I'm just like, whoa, this is so beautiful. And then she compares the two. So early on, she explains how she came out of this and her experience with gender stuff, and then how she came out of it. And then she goes to Genesis and has a chapter just laying out this beautiful gender theory from Genesis. And then she explains the history of gender, how we became so preoccupied with gender, and where we got to the place we are. And then she compares the two theories, the two kind of genderism theory, the gender paradigm that rules our society right now, and the Christian theory. And she kind of compares the two. And then, so by the time you finish with the book, you not only have a much clearer picture of what is going on and the madness around us, but you also like have this beautiful vision of how we could be thinking about gender. So it's just a great book. I really love it, and I encourage you to read it. It's only 239 pages, so it's pretty short. And it's just, I mean, she's just a great writer. So I strongly encourage it. Put it on your Christmas list. Put it on your friends' Christmas list. Not only for women, but also for men. I mean, men, I think, will really gain. I gained a lot from her Genesis theory. I think it's really inspiring to me in my relationships with women. Because, man, I tell you, in the world we're in today, well, anyway, let me just say this is actually really, really inspiring to me. So I hope you get it. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, let me know what you think of it. Thank you for watching this video, and I pray the Lord blesses your day with all you need to know Him more fully.